Yeah, there was a lot of discrimination against women in colleges and universities at all levels. A lot of schools simply didn't take women.
We're talking a really big issue here. We're talking rethinking what women and men can do, should do, what their dollars should pay for, and what their parents' dollars should pay for.
Dr. McKenzie, why is Grove City so opposed to Title IX?
To publicly read or hear on campus about sexual assault was a rarity. You didn't hear about it very often.
Institutions of higher education read this letter and said, oh my goodness, we need to change some things.
Survivors, victims of a lack of due process, and campus administrators have all told me that the current approach does a disservice to everyone involved.
With all other federal laws and guidance that affects the university, I think Title IX is certainly the one that is most complex and changing than any other law.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Life for female students in the 1960s before Title IX was so different that I'm not sure today's students could really understand it. There were no female Rhodes Scholars. If there was an advanced science class, they could say it's for boys only. No girls admitted. If you were in high school, in many schools, boys were required to take shop, girls were required to take home economics, and there was no choice. That's what you did.
Yeah, there was a lot of discrimination against women in colleges and universities at all levels. Many of the colleges had a quota if they took women. But of the co-ed schools, almost all of them had quotas for women. They would only take so many women, no matter how many applied, no matter how bright they were.
In terms of graduate admissions and undergraduate admissions in colleges, almost always female students had to have higher grades, higher test scores, better recommendations than their male counterparts, and even then they didn't get accepted. Your professors were almost all male, unless you're in a female field like nursing or home economics.
Girls and women were not called on as often. There were studies that showed this. Females received less praise, so they got less of that's a good answer, while the guys got, yeah, that's a terrific answer. It didn't reinforce them or encourage them to speak up. It was unladylike to speak up in class when I was a child.
Sex discrimination in education was running rampant during the 1960s, as it was systematically unnoticed. And it wasn't just discrimination against female students. There was also discrimination against women seeking employment. Bernice Bunny Sandler was turned down of a teaching job 3 times after obtaining a doctorate degree at the University of Maryland. Sandler was told that she came on too strong for a woman and not really a professional, but just a housewife who went back to school.
They were very open about it. They said, we just don't take too many women. And then they paused, especially married women. And then they paused again, especially married women with children. I mean, nobody thought that was wrong. That all made sense.
The discrimination that Sandler faced would not only change her life, but would also change the lives of many other women.
Well, I suddenly realized we had a way to file sex discrimination cases, that they were violating this executive order. This executive order which said if you had a federal contract of any sort, you were a school, you were a business or whatever, but if you had a federal contract, which many colleges and universities did, you couldn't discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, and sex. That was a eureka moment. And I realized that colleges had contracts with universities to do various projects, and that therefore they were covered by the executive order. So I started filing charges, and everybody said, don't do that. You won't get your degree if you do that. And I figured I wasn't going to get a degree. They weren't going to give me a degree anyway because I was a troublemaker. If anybody ever counted, I probably have filed more charges of sex discrimination than anybody else in the country.
Bunny Sandler filed administrative charges of sex discrimination against nearly 250 universities and colleges through an organization called the Women's Equity Action League, catching the attention of Congresswoman Edith Green, who sat on the League's advisory board.
Edith Green was the congresswoman from Oregon who had been elected on her own, unlike most women in Congress. She had the stature, the power to hold hearings in 1970, 71 about women in higher education, discrimination against women. Bunny Sandler had taken a part-time job working with Edith Green on the hearings on sex discrimination in 1970-71.
I was practically the only person who was working on that issue, and so they held the hearings, and I testified that there was discrimination in education, and everyone said, "What?" And I said, "Yes." And then they began changing the laws.
After the hearing she put in what originally started as Title X and then became Title IX. Bunny Sandler tells a famous story where people said, well, we're going to go out and we're going to lobby and we're going to tell people about it. And she said, don't do that. Do not do that. That is a bad idea. So it's a real sleeper amendment.
Title IX was introduced in the Senate by Senator Birch Bayh of Indiana, drawing support from notable members of Congress. On June 23, 1972, Title IX was signed into law by President Richard Nixon under the Federal Education Amendments, stating, "No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance."
It was basically passed because of discrimination in graduate and professional programs or programs that led to jobs. Quotas or higher test scores for women in medical schools, telling women they couldn't come to law school at all, just keeping women totally out of some programs. And it was all perfectly legal until Title IX.
Title IX applies to all educational programs and activities that receive federal funding. This includes all public K-12 schools, colleges, universities, and many private schools. The Ivy League colleges would successfully lobby to exempt undergraduate admissions from Title IX, which would apply to all private colleges, but these institutions had to provide equal opportunity for graduate admissions. And Title IX would gain nationwide attention by making an unexpected impact outside of the classroom.
Once Title IX was passed, one of the areas that became the tail that wagged the Title IX dog was the huge disparities in intercollegiate athletics. And that's when Title IX really hit the front pages.
We weren't very aware how important athletic was. Most of us were not athletes, we were intellectuals. So we were not athletes and not interested in athletics at all. So it wasn't something we were taking notice of, and didn't recognize the impact that it would have.
We're talking a really big issue here. We're talking rethinking what women and men can do, should do, what their dollars should pay for, and what their parents' dollars should pay for.
As people started to look at college athletics, Margaret Dunkel would conduct the first research documenting what constitutes equality for women in sport.
So because we couldn't get data, we got all the examples we could of what women's programs and men's programs looked like and compared them. No scholarships, coaches that weren't paid where the male coaches were paid, having to use the fields only when the male teams didn't want them. These are huge differences. These are not little things. So sports became the engine of Title IX.
And a month after Margaret Dunkel released the research, Title IX would face serious threats from legislation proposed by a senator from Texas.
Senator Tower of Texas was joined at the hip with big-time college football. He kept coming up with amendments to exclude athletics from Title IX in different kinds of ways. And some of his amendments were kind of word salad. You couldn't quite figure out what they were saying, but then when you figured it out, you said, oops, this is not so good. Because athletics is important because it has the potential to show strong, competent women with visible achievement. And that became a metaphor for Title IX. So the efforts to take athletics out would have seriously weakened Title IX in other areas. The issue of gender discrimination was so personal to everybody, which often transcended party. So it made sense to talk to everyone, and that was eventually the approach that beat back the Tower Amendment effectively.
But keeping Title IX alive was just half the battle. There was a struggle in getting athletic programs to comply with the law, as the fight revolved around one thing: money.
You know, I was in high school back in the 70s and just very interested in sports when I was a young child and in high school. And then I heard about Title IX coming into being. And so for me, I got the opportunity to participate in high school track in 74 and 75 because of Title IX. I came to Arkansas 1981 as the head women's track coach. At that time, all the women's coaches were not full-time. We were all on 9-month contract and we were all half-time. I think when I first came, I was teaching 5 classes and then head coach and had a graduate assistant coach. And that was it at the time. And we were having to, try to do some fundraising and raise some money for our teams. And back then the coaches were doing all the support services themselves. When I was here coaching, we didn't have a lot of funding. I had to select which meets I was going to go to, and we had a van, like a 22-passenger little bus we called the Hog Hauler, and we'd hop into that. The coaches would drive, and we'd drive all the way down to Houston or Austin for a meet, and the men's team would fly in, and we'd stay to a hotel room, and just a lot of, because we didn't have the funding. So it was a difficult time.
And as the fight for equity in women's sports programs remained, the major Supreme Court case ruling in Grove City versus Bell would stall the efforts of many. The private co-educational Christian school refused state and federal financial assistance, but a large number of their students received federal funding, subjecting Grove City to comply with Title IX. And in 1984, the court case decided in their favor. The decision removed Title IX from affecting athletics in schools by stating only programs or activities that receive direct federal financial assistance be held under the umbrella of Title IX.
Dr. McKenzie, why is Grove City so opposed to Title IX?
Actually, we're really not opposed to Title IX, Judy, in principle, and we're very supportive of the intention of Title IX. But we are very much opposed to signing a compliance form which, in essence, would give the federal government jurisdiction over a private college that accepts not one penny of direct federal funding.
I think in Grove City versus Bell, when it kind of suspended Title IX and says it only applies to, what programs directly get federal financial aid, I think during that time it did stall the growth of women's sports a little bit.
In 1988, Title IX's power in athletics would be fully restored with the Civil Rights Restoration Act.
The Civil Rights Restoration Act was so important because there had been some cases that had tried to take the teeth out of Title IX, and I think it was real important that Congress went back and emphasized this is the law of the land and it's going to apply across the board and not rule college athletics out of it. Then you saw institutions really starting to put money into Title IX and really funding it. I think having coached here, I was able to see all the weaknesses and all the things that needed to be changed. And I was able to sit down and draw up, okay, here's a 4 or 5 year plan. This is what we need to do. We were able to create a plan for facilities, for practices, for support staff, for coaches and coaches' salaries to try to build the women's program. It was a real fun for me to be women's athletic director during that time of expansion. And it was real fun to watch each of the programs go on to be nationally competitive. We were able to add softball to the program, volleyball to the program, women's golf and women's gymnastics. Having grown up as a young girl loving to play sports and having to kind of fight to be able to do it, it's nice now to look at young women and see that they have participation opportunities. You see young girls now playing soccer, playing softball from little girls on up, and they don't know any different. They don't know that that wasn't the norm years ago, and they wouldn't have been able to do that if they had grown up 40 years earlier. And again, that goes back to Title IX and just the growth in sports opportunities for women in the nation.
But while intercollegiate athletics remained at the forefront of Title IX, the educational amendment continued to evolve into another problematic area. And it all started in the year 1980 with the court case Alexander versus Yale University. Supreme Court cases established sexual assault as a form of sexual harassment and made schools liable for sexual harassment amongst the students, faculty, and staff. And as Title IX expanded more in this realm, sexual assault on college campuses became the dominant issue.
I think to publicly read or hear on campus about sexual assault was a rarity. You didn't hear about it very often. For one thing, the reported incidences of sexual assault and sexual harassment were fairly low in numbers in places that I had been. I think I did not hear much about Title IX as it relates to sexual harassment and sexual misconduct until probably after 2011. I believe that was the year that the Dear Colleague letter came out.
The Dear Colleague letter comes out of the Department for Education, the Office for Civil Rights, and it basically said, you're not doing a good enough job. Here are the things that you really need to have in place, and if you're not doing these things, potentially you're in violation of Title IX. Institutions of higher education read this letter and said, oh my goodness, we need to change some things. For some people, it changed the standard of evidence that they were using to make decisions around sexual violence, sexual harassment cases. Dear Colleague letter required us to use a preponderance of the information, which is more likely than not that something happened, or a 50.01% that something occurred. So there were some of those little things that people really put into place, and it became a much greater focus for a lot of institutions in relationship to making sure we were addressing these issues on our campuses effectively.
I think some institutions have struggled with Title IX compliance, not through any malicious or inappropriate behavior, but some schools have struggled just lack of training, lack of funding, lack of resources to have Title IX coordinators or experienced Title IX investigators. There's a number of challenges with dealing with a Title IX complaint. You know, we are an institution of higher education. We're not a court or a police agency. We don't have the power to subpoena people or compel people to give us interviews or talk to us. So a lot of what we have to do as far as investigating allegations is dependent on people just working with us. So we have to contact students and ask them to meet with us. And this is often made more difficult when there's a corresponding police investigation going on. So that makes things challenging when the expectation is that we resolve complaints promptly, and we do that is, I guess, not necessarily as quickly as we can, but sometimes there feels an obligation to act very fast, but sometimes we can't.
So the university is really kind of stuck in the middle of a whole lot of stakeholders who want certain outcomes. We've got all different parties, advocacy groups, complainants, respondents, parents, attorneys, all of these folks with competing needs, and the university is stuck in the middle trying to resolve that. We've got people who are hurting on all sides of the issue, and it's not just the folks directly involved, it's their friends, it's their families, it's all of the people in the community who are impacted by these issues. And in the meantime, we as an institution are trying as hard as possible to stay in the middle, which means no one is happy with us. We're vulnerable to complaints to OCR, we're vulnerable to litigation, even as we do everything that we can to make sure that we're doing right by all of our students.
This kind of problem or issue that goes very deep to the core of the individuals. I mean, it affects individuals like nothing else I've ever seen at a university. I think they have deep, lasting effects on both of these parties that are involved in any one of these cases.
It was the fall semester of 2013, and during that time, I was a victim of sexual assault and rape. Three years after the incident, I finally had the strength to file a Title IX complaint. I filed it during the summer, and it took a couple of months for the process to actually begin. And once the investigation started, I was studying abroad during the time, so all of the communication was done by email. And since there was no evidence to support my claim, the case really just turned out to be my word against theirs. So as a result, the respondents weren't found liable. And because of the circumstances, I kind of knew what the results was going to be, but I wanted my situation to be justified, so I place expectations on Title IX and the university, but in the end it just intensified the hopelessness feeling that I had. And with me feeling that, I struggled in finding outlets to cope with the pain. And when it comes to my situation, I think even if things went my way during the investigation process, there would still be pain from my past that I would have to deal with personally. So I believe that true justice comes with forgiveness. And that's something that I would want to encourage all survivors to do, is to let go, or at least begin on the path of letting go. Because even after the investigation case, there's still healing that we have to do.
Proposed rules by Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, obtained by the New York Times, could strengthen protections for students accused of sexual misconduct and reduce the potential liability of schools. It comes, of course, at a time when a number of major universities are dealing with serious abuse allegations.
Among the changes, the rules narrow the definition of sexual harassment to conduct that is severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive. Accused students could bring lawyers to misconduct hearings and would have the right to cross-examine, although the parties couldn't question each other directly. It also gives schools more flexibility and limits the number of cases they have to investigate.
It's also true that colleges have messed up on due process in a number of cases. I don't think you can say due process isn't an issue. The question is, can you have due process in ways that also encourage victims to come forward?
DeVos says the proposed rules are grounded in the principles of due process.
black or... Oh, hey, Spencer.
Oh, hey, Cecilia.
Do you want the regular?
Actually, I'm not really thirsty.
Then why did you come there?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I probably shouldn't be here.
Oh, you're more than welcome to make yourself comfortable here.
Really? Thanks, Cecilia.
Anything for a repeat customer.
Okay. Calm down. You've known her for a year. She knows your name. Just look her in the eye and say, would you like to catch a movie sometime? What's the worst that could happen?
Actually, when you stop and take a moment and think about it, a lot could happen.
Who the hell are you?
Forgive me, Spencer. This might sound a little strange, but I'm your anxiety.
What? Great. I've been under so much stress now I'm hallucinating.
We'll worry about your therapy sessions a little bit later, but right now, I'm here to help you, to keep you from making a terrible, horrible mistake.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about Cecilia. I mean, she's nice and all, but that's just part of the job. The nicer they are, the bigger the tip.
Come on, she isn't like that.
Think about it for a minute. Cecilia is a knockout. We're just us. You know I'm right.
Maybe.
You're not seriously listening to him, are you?
Oh, great. Another one? Which one are you?
I'm your confidence, bro.
Are you going to try to make me depressed like the other guy?
I'm just trying to help.
He's just trying to rattle you. He's been paranoid ever since that goat bit us back at the petting zoo when we were 5 years old.
I told you that goat had shifty little eyes, but no, you didn't want to listen to me.
Anyways, we can't just give up on life just because it gets difficult.
Yes, you can. We could sit on the couch in our underwear watching nothing but Netflix for the rest of our lives.
We can, but binge watching does not take the place of the loving embrace of a woman. Think of the good things that could happen if she says yes. The first kiss, sharing popcorn at the movies, getting nice and cozy on those cold winter nights.
Please, when have we ever remotely come close to that?
What about Hannah?
She was just using us to copy off our homework.
Oh, what about Brady?
We were just a shoulder for her to cry on.
Well, then what about Zoe?
You and I both know why that wasn't going to work.
Come on, Spence. Back me up, man.
Yo, Spencer. You with us, man?
Sorry, I was thinking about the warm, cozy nights.
Okay, you know what? If you think this is such a good idea, then why don't we just take a look and see what could happen, hmm?
What the hell was that?
That was just a little taste of what a relationship between you and Cecilia would look like.
So far, so good.
Very good, huh?
Yeah. Well, of course it all starts off great, and you might even get married. But just remember that 50% of all marriages end in divorce, and half the time the spouse ends up getting all of the guy's stuff. That leads to depression. Before you know it, you've lost all your friends, and all you've got left to do is turn to the bottle. You end up locking yourself in your room, staring at a TV that isn't flat and probably doesn't even work, thinking about how sad and pathetic and lonely you are, and then you realize the only thing that's going to give you any peace at all is the sweet release of death. What? We're all thinking it.
The only person who's thinking that is you unstable maniac.
I'm just trying to help.
That's it. We're getting out of here, you psycho loon.
He's staying.
He's going.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Enough!
Enough of what? Are you okay, Spence?
Yeah. I'm fine now.
All right.
Hey, Cecilia, wait up! I wanted to ask you something.
Yeah, what is it, Spence?
I was wondering if maybe you would want to go out with me sometime.
I guess some real Mara
Feel more calm, snake. Feel more snake. Starting to feel like I'm starting to get those serpents. Hit him with the
try to get I just want some chest.
Which almost possible.
I guess it's a real problem. It's a real problem. I got some real problems in there.
You what?
What's the Voices for?
The Voices? It's for an experimental film I'm making right now.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks for the cigarette.
Yeah, no problem, man. No problem. So what's your name?
I'm Brian.
Brian?
When the sun goes down and the night breathes in like a lion on the prowl, ready for the kill. Like an ocean beside you, your soul underwater, never rest. Like a whisper inside you, goes louder, louder, never rest. Rise up again. You never walk alone in the dark. Not for your